I'm especially concerned about the world's most forgotten people. Often they are impoverished, often they are minorities, victims of war and disaster, disabled, elderly. It's the heart of Christ that we intentionally focus our effort on behalf of these people. At this moment, the world is in conflict. Look at this man. What do you suppose he is saying? It's an appeal. Help us. Relieve our suffering, relieve our stress. Look at this child. Why is this 3-year-old behind barbed wire? Doesn't that create within you a sense of injustice? A passion to step out with action on behalf of such injustice. Recently, it's been disasters as well that have brought to our mind the plight of such individuals. It was just a year ago we had this massive earthquake in Turkey and Syria. Floods, fires, earthquakes often bring to light the plight of those that we may not be thinking of otherwise were it not for that particular disaster. Epidemic diseases. Now, we've come through COVID. Did you know that Ebola continues to recur? Now, very few people die of Ebola compared to other diseases, but this is a disease that has like a 50% mortality rate. Half the people who get Ebola die. If this ever gets out of control, it will be a human catastrophe. And as we are pursuing what's happening around the globe, then we ask ourselves, what's my role? What's my part? For me, it began working at the charity hospital in Shanghai, China in the 80s. And at that time, China was an impoverished country. Most of the disease we took care of at Shanghai Charity was tuberculosis and schistosomiasis and rheumatic fever, diseases closely connected with low income. And of course, as China has grown economically, so has the prevalence of those diseases decreased. In the second part of my career, I worked in Angola in southern Africa. Angola at that time was best known for its ongoing civil war. And as a result, there was no healthcare infrastructure, there was no education available for children, there were no jobs. Only until Angola got a peace accord were they able to start addressing the poverty and the disease, which is now slowly improving. Today I teach at the Institute for International Medicine. Our purpose is to cast a vision and to equip healthcare professionals with the kind of skills they need to engage the world on behalf of the individuals that we have just talked about in brief. We're going to explore some basic cross-cultural skills. Now, whether you practice in the United States or in a developing nation somewhere else, you're going to, of course, need to be interacting with people who are very different from yourself. And so to begin this morning, we're going to do a role play. As you came in, each of you received a paper, and it has at the top of the paper an X or an O. Now, what I want you to do in a moment is pair yourself up with someone who has an X or an O, different from yourself. As you look at your paper, you're going to see there's 2 scenarios, at the top and at the bottom. Right now, we're only doing scenario number 1. Only number 1. And so, X and O, one of you is a nurse practitioner, and one of you is recently arrived from Ghana. I want you to act it out. So read your role right now, pair yourself up with your partner, and see if you can solve this cultural dilemma as you work out this patient encounter. And then I will bring us back together again in a few moments and we'll talk about it. Go. Now, I want to hear back from some of you Ghanaians. Who was a Ghanaian? Raise your hand. All right. Were you convinced that there's a problem? No, most of you are shaking your head. You were not convinced there was any problem with your health. All right, let me hear from the nurse practitioners. Did you make any success? Did anything work? No, it didn't work. No, surely someone was able to convince their patient that they need to change their behavior. Maybe one person. What we're going to do now in the next 20 minutes or so is review some basic cross-cultural skills, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to apply those by doing the second scenario at the bottom of your page. If you have just come in, you should receive a page that either says X on the top or O on the top, and we'll have you pair up with an opposite person, X's and O's, here again in a few moments. Now, there's a close connection between our culture and our physical health. Now, in the last few minutes, we've been talking about diet and exercise primarily, but there are some other connections. What comes to mind? Raise your hand and give me an example. Connections between our social behavior and our physical health. Religion. Things we eat. Our beliefs. Economics. Certainly our income status affects our behavior. What about tobacco use? What about other kind of drugs? Alcohol, fentanyl. Did any of you drive here this morning? Did you put on your seatbelt? All right. Seatbelt use, of course, is highly correlated with your probability of surviving a motor vehicle accident. Not everybody wears seatbelts. You see where I'm going with this? What are some other connections between our behavior and our health? Education level. Do you put on sunscreen when you're outside? Do you carry a handgun? All of these behaviors are closely connected with our physical health. Yeah, exactly. It also influences how we perceive health problems. Let's say, for example, I have a headache. All right, I've got this terrible headache. Now, I need some help. I can't manage this on my own. To what kind of practitioner could I go to treat my headache? Raise your hand and tell me. Yeah. Razor blade on my ear, or go to a traditional healer, sure. An herbalist, yes. Who else can treat your headache? A neurologist. A pharmacist. There are still people who go to the pharmacy and ask the pharmacist, what should I do for my... A chiropractor, yes, an ER. A shaman. A spiritual healer, a counselor, a priest. In the second scenario, we're going to be examining closely this interaction with health professionals and what kind of touching is appropriate or is not appropriate in the context of a healthcare setting. One of the features of healthcare education today, regardless of what profession you're in, is this emphasis upon cross-cultural skills. Now, this is new in the last 20 years, but it's a recognition that we are constantly interacting with people who may be very, very different from ourselves. What do you think of this question? Belief or examples of culture influencing health include all of these, except which one? Which one is not true? B, you're correct. That's right. So highly motivated, self-determined people do have more coronary artery disease, do have a higher risk of stroke, And they are more likely to survive because they have got that strong, I'm going to do this, I'm going to pull myself out of this. My father was a man like that. Very hardworking, industrious, self-starter businessman. And then he got chest pain. And just as that started, he stopped smoking. He started exercising every single day. He changed his diet completely. He applied that same kind of character to his disease, which was just in time to basically save his life. Now, there's 4 core principles of cross-cultural skills. Any idea what those might be? If you want to interact with people who are very different from yourself, you need to adjust, learn, sensitivity, listen. Yeah, exactly. So we're going to touch on each of these one by one. We're aware of our biases. We have some knowledge of cultures. We use a process of observing and understanding and adjusting. And then sometimes we also need competent interpretation. Now, interpretation not only of language, but also of culture, because we might be speaking the same language, but mean completely different things. If I'm from the UK or I'm from South Africa and I tell you I'm going on holiday, what does that mean? Well, in North America, it means I'm going to be off for a day. It's a holiday. It's a birthday. It's a new year. It's a holiday. But in other places around the world, holiday means like the entire month of August, or I'll see you in February. Or we're using the same language, but our cultural interpretation is very different. And so you may need a competent cultural interpreter to help you as well. So let's start with number 1, awareness of our own attitudes and biases. Now, one of the most precious values of a cross-cultural experience is that it helps us to recognize things about ourselves and about our own home culture that we never realized before because we had not seen it from the perspective of an outsider. I'm going to say the name of some cultures or races in a moment, and I want you to think of the first impression that comes to mind. Now, I'm not going to ask you to say this out loud. You're not going to share it with anyone. It's just between you and God. Here goes. Black. African American. Asian. Hispanic. Syrian. White Caucasian. Now, what comes to mind might be things like, oh, that person is black, great athlete, wonderful musician. That person is Hispanic, really dedicated to their family, very industrious, hard worker. That person is Asian, curve buster, top of the class. That person is white Caucasian, very narrow-minded and untraveled. Now, what's wrong with statements like that? Yeah, they may have nothing to do with the actual person you're interacting with, right? They're generalizations that we all naturally collect, but they may be completely unapplicable to your particular situation. And so being aware of those inherent attitudes, biases, is a first step in getting along with people who may be very different from yourself. Attitudes of respect. In this interaction that you did at the very beginning, what could you do, you the nurse practitioner, what could you do to communicate respect towards that patient? How do you show respect in a clinical setting? Give me a pearl. Acknowledgement of their beliefs. Call them by name, use their name, use their title if you can. You know, Mr., Doctor, Professor, whatever. Make sure your body language is opening, inviting. Ask about their family. What is your background? Tell me about your children. What about eye contact? It depends upon the culture. But when I first moved to China, one of the things that just drove me nuts is that students would not look at me. You know, I would ask a student to do a presentation, they'd come to the front of the class, and they'd have their paper, and they'd never look at anybody. And I thought, oh, they're so shy, they're so disrespectful, they're so distant and interactive. And only after much time and consideration did I discover that no, they're showing respect by not making eye contact. And that is the exact opposite in North America, where if you trust someone, you look them right in the eye and you tell them what you think. And so being aware of how you communicate respect with people from a given culture is going to be really critical to your success. So when I first moved to Angola, my mentor was Enrique. And Enrique was very different from my Asia experience. Very friendly, outgoing, eye contact, interactive. And he said, well, Dr. Nicholas, if you're going to be successful in our country, you must go out of your way to be humble. Because people are naturally looking at you as the American foreigner, as the authority, as the ruler, as the disciplinarian, and you need to be the exact opposite. You need to embody the teaching of Philippians. Do nothing out of selfishness, but in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking only to your own interests, but to the interest of others. Timeless spiritual principle for human relationships. Which one of these is not a component of healthy cross-cultural relationships? That's right. B, recognize that some attitude of cultural superiority is unavoidable. No, actually, if you show any kind of cultural superiority, that's very likely going to be a cancer on your relationships. Some knowledge about culture can be life-saving. Now, people in North America often feel like we have some level of comfort with Hispanics. You know, there's a lot of Hispanics in our natural communities. But with Asians, not so much, with Middle Easterners especially. So I made my first visit to Burkina Faso in West Africa. You all know where Burkina Faso is located. Yeah, all right. So, here's Africa, and Burkina Faso is basically the bicep of Africa. And I had been on an airplane for 30 hours, and I was completely exhausted, and it was baking hot, and I was going through immigration, and there was a young man with a gun. And he said in broken English, "Give me your passport." So I reached in my pocket, and I pulled out my passport, and I handed it to him. And, oh, he was livid. Oh, he was livid, and he lowered his gun. He turned it my way. And everybody in immigration, they were like, oh! They were aghast. And I'm standing here with my passport just like he asked. What was I doing wrong? It was my left hand. I had no idea that in that culture, the left hand is only used for one purpose. And it's not handing a document to an official. So some knowledge of culture could have been life-saving. And so it behooves us, if we are interacting with people different from ourselves, especially in highly stressed situations, that we be very careful. Basic knowledge of that culture. And then finally, there is this process of observing a problem, trying to understand why it's going on, and then making some kind of adjustment. So we start by observe. What's the dynamic in the room? What are people saying? How are people responding? We're not making a judgment at this point. We're just trying to gather information about the conflict. What's happening here? So I was caring for this Honduran woman. She had just immigrated to the U.S., and she had delivered twins. And I did a well-child 6-week checkup on her twins. Normal thing, listen to exam, give them their vaccinations, measure their head circumference. Well, the next day she returned to the clinic and she was livid. Where is that doctor? Where is that doctor who put a curse on my children? Where is that doctor who hates my children? My children are dying because of that doctor. And people in the waiting room, they started trying to get out of there as quick as they could. And I was in the back and I heard this ruckus and I came forward, and when she saw me, said, You're the one who cursed my children. And of course, I was totally confused about what was going on. And I said, I'm really sorry. Why do you suppose I put a curse on your children? She said, my babies, they're feverish and they're throwing up. And it's because of you. And I said, please tell me more. What happened? She said, well, doctor, you put that cold thing on my baby's chest. And you put that paper thing around my baby's head. And you stuck that thing in my baby's thigh. Well, of course, those are the normal things that we do in well-child check. But you never told me how beautiful are my babies. You never said how fortunate I was to have such lovely daughters. And so you must hate me. And you must hate my daughters. You must be jealous that I have such beautiful children. And I said, I am so sorry. I did not mean to assault you and your babies. What should I do? Tell me what to do. And she said, well, you must remove the curse. Remove the curse. I think I missed that lecture in school. And so I improvised. I put my hand on the baby and I raised my other hand to heaven and I prayed the curse be removed and the babies be healed. And as I was praying, I could see the tension relax in her face. And she said, now I know my children will be well. Like maybe she had been through this kind of experience before in her own culture. And she was satisfied and happy, and she took her babies home, and she came back for a follow-up appointment 2 months later. Observe what's going on, understand why, make an adjustment. Manuel is a child that we cared for at the CML hospital in Angola, Southern Africa. Steve Foster is with us this morning. You heard him speak at the conference last night. Steve, would you raise your hand? If you haven't had a chance to meet Dr. Foster, please do so afterwards. So Manuel is this child who came in with an abdominal wall abscess. It was a necrotizing fasciitis that had basically destroyed the skin of his entire abdomen. And I was talking with my colleague, Sarah, who is Angolan, and she said, there she is, there's Sarah. I said, this child is so profoundly malnourished. How is this possible? And she said, well, you have to understand, in our culture, in Angolan culture, it's typical to feed a child cornmeal. And I said, that's all? She said, yeah, that's basically what we give our children. Well, what about the protein? Oh, no. Children don't need protein. Protein is for the man. The man must be strong to defend the family. And so we just take some cornmeal and we put in some water and we boil that. And that's pretty much what children live on. And I'm thinking to myself, in the case of this child with this abdominal wall abscess, well, he has no nutritional resistance, with which to fight off this infection. And I said, what would be acceptable? Is there some way that we could talk with the parents of this child about moving forward? Maybe we're not slaughtering a goat and giving the kid meat, but maybe some progress forward. And she said, well, what about eggs? Eggs are a protein source. Eggs are rather available. It could be a step that we can help them make an adjustment so that this child would have some source of protein moving forward. Part of the healing process, in addition to debridement and antibiotic, addressing the nutritional component of this disease. I want to give you an opportunity now to apply this process of observe, understand, and adjust by going through scenario number 2. So look again at your X and your O sheet. Now we're doing scenario number 2 at the bottom of the page. You are reversing roles. Now one of you is a physician, and now one of you is a patient recently immigrated from Central Asia. So read your role, and then try to work it out between one another, understanding, adjusting, and finding a compromise. Begin. How did it go this time? Let me start by asking some of you from Xinjiang, Central Asia, were you convinced that you wanted to follow your physician's advice? Some of you are saying yes. What convinced you? Yes, please. Her gentleness. Her soft touch. Very good. All right, another Xinjiang woman. What convinced you that this was a good interaction? You wanted to do what was suggested. Gave me all kinds of options. We can bring in a female doctor, a Muslim doctor. Yes. All right, let's flip it around and talk to the physician. What did you say to your patient that you think was helpful to build trust and to get them to see the way you see things? Let's focus on the problem, the bleeding, and get beyond your fears. Yes, please. Talk about the culture that they came from in addition to just the problem. I'm going to be wrapping up in just a moment, and I'd like you to be thinking if you have a particular pearl of wisdom that you would like to share with the group. I'm going to open it up for that in just a moment. Let's consider this final question. Expected outcomes of culturally skilled healthcare include all of these, except which one? If we're doing it right, we would expect all of this to happen except okay, the answer I'm looking for is D. It's going to take more time. Even if you speak a common language, you're probably going to take twice as much time with someone who is from a culture different from yourself. And then if there is interpretation involved, then you need another twice as much time, regardless. But generally speaking, we're going to have fewer diagnostic errors if we communicate well with our patients. We're going to be less reliant upon technology and laboratory if we trust what our patients are saying. Satisfaction between ourselves and our patients is going to be higher because they trust us more. Moving forward. So give me a pearl. Just briefly, some advice that you have got to share with the group. Yes?
I would have anatomy might not be taught in other cultures the same way it is here. They might not know what is bleeding.
They might not know what is bleeding. Yeah, anatomy might not be something that they're aware of.
So having a model, I think, would be helpful.
Having a model might be helpful to show them. Yeah, one more pearl, please.
I think it's important. I'm a midwife, and I think that it's important for a lot of women, especially in other cultures and religions, to know that some of these things are not their fault.
Yeah, some of these things are not your fault. Yeah, to take away the sense of shame that might be associated with that. Yeah, excellent. So learning cross-cultural skills is a process. It's an ongoing process. It can be one of the most fascinating elements of human life. One of the things I love about it is that challenge. My career is focused on giving people a skill and experience that can make them more able to care for people who are culturally very different from ourselves. As you go out, there's some cards on the table you could pick up that have more information about that. I want to leave you with one final example from the book of Revelation. Culture of the world is our future, as described in Revelation 7. After this I looked up, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, every tribe, every people and language, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed in white, with palm branches in their hands. This is our future, eternity, with people who are fascinated and often very different from ourselves. Thank you.